Greetings everyone, it's Kaz here, and today I am talking Bethesda Game Studios, and specifically some really interesting developments and news around Bethesda Game Studios that has broken over the past week or so, and that is the fact that we now have, I guess, a semi-confirmation that Bethesda Game Studios' next game will most likely include multiplayer in some fashion. Now, we don't know exactly what this will include. Is it going to be a competitive multiplayer mode? Will it be co-op? I don't know. That's what we're going to discuss in today's video in terms of what I want to see in Bethesda Game Studios multiplayer, and how I also really want it to be implemented, and what games I want them to be implemented into. So I want to thank MrMattyPlays. He is the one that broke this news. I'll leave a link to his original video in the description. You can go and check that out. He goes into a lot more detail in terms of how we know this information. So I guess the basics of it is that ZeniMax has a job listing up, and it is essentially requesting for a certain type of video game developing engineer, and it is for Bethesda Game Studios in Maryland, which is of course Todd Howard's main team, which develops the Fallout and Elder Scrolls franchise as well. And one of the job requirements for this role was someone who had experience developing multiplayer content in video games. Now, I don't think Bethesda Game Studios in Maryland would be desiring someone for their development team who requires experience in developing multiplayer games if they had absolutely no interest in multiplayer. So I think it is pretty damn fair to assume off this that Bethesda Game Studios' next game will have multiplayer. My assumption is that they're hiring this multiplayer developer, this person who has expertise in developing multiplayer games, because their next game will have multiplayer functionality, and they want only one person who has experience in developing multiplayer games to assist them with that process, and I guess finalizing some of the things and making little tweaks that they feel are better suited to the experience. So I assume there's already a very large foundation. I assume this game's already in full development, potentially almost finished. So with the background out of the way, a lot of people have been disappointed in this. If you read through comment sections after this news broke, people were just declining this. They did not want this at all. People were just saying, no, please, we can't have multiplayer in a Bethesda title. This can't be. They're single-player RPGs. And while I understand what they're saying, I really do. I am a Bethesda fan. Now, I'm not an old-school Bethesda fan. My first Bethesda Game Studios game was Skyrim, and then went on to be Fallout 4. So I'm certainly a fan of their work, but I'm not a huge die-hard old-school person who has a massive amount of nostalgia for games like Morrowind, for games like Daggerfall and things like that. I'm definitely not like that or in that camp at all. But even still, I do understand where some of this negativity and where some of this, I guess, hesitation to be making a multiplayer game from the fans' perspective does come from. Bethesda Game Studios makes stellar single-player RPGs. They do. And as buggy as they can be, and as much as they need a new engine, that's 100% a fact. Their games are stellar, and I don't think anyone can deny that. They make great video games that appeal and resonate with so many people. And I guess the fans are really concerned that their favourite Bethesda games, their formula, is going to be tampered with too much. We saw what happened with Fallout 4. They did try and tamper with the formula, with the two big changes being the settlement mode and also voice acting, and that did not go over well with the fans because they're trying to change it too much. And while I agree with their concern, I disagree with the fact that we can't have change. Change is good. Bethesda Game Studios took risks with Fallout 4. They gave things chances, and some of them paid off, some of them didn't, and that's totally fine. They need to take chances. They can't keep re-releasing the same formula constantly and constantly, no matter how good the content is, no matter how good the actual gameplay is. They can't re-release the same thing constantly. Not only will it make things tiring for their games in the future for the consumer, but think about them as well. They don't want to be developing the same thing over and over again. So from their perspective, if I were them, I would totally start doing some multiplayer stuff. It would be certainly really interesting for them, and a change of pace as well. And that's why I do think that them giving multiplayer a try as a studio is a really, really cool idea, and I do like it. However, I do have a few caveats. I'm not all in on the idea of multiplayer. I'm certainly not all against the idea like a lot of people, but I'm not necessarily all for it either. I do have two specific caveats I want for this Bethesda Game Studios multiplayer mode. I don't want to say, yeah, Bethesda, go and do whatever you want. You do it, I trust you, because that's not necessarily the case. I do have two main caveats with this multiplayer mode and what I want out of it. The first big caveat is I do want this to be a cooperative experience only. Bethesda Game Studios make RPGs. They make single-player RPGs. That's what they're known for. But everyone, I can assure you, everyone who's played a Bethesda game has thought to themselves how amazing this experience would be, how much better it would be if there was another person running around, if you were able to play through this incredible experience with your friends. And that's what I want to see from Bethesda Game Studios Multiplayer. I do not want to see competitive multiplayer deathmatch style arena shooters or anything along those lines. I want to see absolutely none of those archetypal multiplayer games or modes. Having their games still have that identity that we're aware of, the RPGs, the huge open worlds, that's what we want, that's what we recognize with Bethesda Game Studios, and just adding multiplayer, adding co-op to that experience would be awesome. But I personally really dislike competitive shooters or that kind of style of multiplayer, and I do not want it in a Bethesda Game Studios game. That's where I draw the line. That's where I start to get a little bit pessimistic on the idea if that's what they're going for. However, Pete Hines in the past has talked about Bethesda Game Studios' upcoming projects, and he has stated that their upcoming projects are different in terms of what we're used to from Bethesda Game Studios, but at the same time still can be associated with their regular identity. When he says that, I can assume he means an open world RPG in some sense, just with that co-op aspect added. That would be cool. I'm totally down for that. In terms of how it would actually work, I've genuinely got no idea, and I thank the gods above it isn't my job to decide, because I'm genuinely conflicted on how that would work. From the small things like pausing the game when you're in your inventory, that would not be possible anymore, and that would definitely not work so well with a lot of the mechanics in the game, so there are definitely some problems that they need to sort out there, but I do trust they're able to do it. The second thing I wanted to talk about with Bethesda Game Studios Multiplayer and when I'd be okay with it, at least for now, I'm all good for multiplayer if it's co-op and if it's in a new IP first. We know Bethesda Game Studios are working on new IP, and it's a 90% chance that new IP will be their next game. Pete Hines has said that there's going to be 2 major projects from Bethesda Game Studios before The Elder Scrolls 6 ever releases, so I think we can pretty evidently take that out of the picture that the game we're talking about here is not The Elder Scrolls 6. It could possibly be Fallout 5, and the only reason I think that may be the case was the huge financial success that was Fallout 4 may have invoked Bethesda Game Studios to think to themselves, okay, you're going to make another Fallout game because that's what sells, that's what generates money, and that's cool. So it's definitely possible we're talking about Fallout 5 here. I don't think it is Fallout 5, and I hope it's not Fallout 5. People disliked Fallout 4 because of the new things it tried to do, and while I do disagree with the idea that it's cool to dislike a game because it tried new things, but at the same time, I do feel that some of the major changes Fallout 4 made, like the voice acting, like the settlement system, that should have been implemented into another game first before jumping in and making fundamental changes to Fallout 4 and to the Fallout franchise. And that's why I think that the multiplayer from Bethesda Game Studios should not be included in the next Fallout, should not be included in the Elder Scrolls 6, but should first be included in their new IP. A new IP has no identity. No one has particular expectations from what should be in that game. They should test it out with the new IP first, see how well it goes over. If it doesn't go over well, that's fine, move on to the Elder Scrolls 6, move on to the next Fallout, that's fine. But if they think that this co-op multiplayer or this multiplayer or whatever it is good, and if they are happy with it and if the fans are happy with it, then continue to put it in other franchises, then put it in the Elder Scrolls 6, then put it in Fallout 5. But don't do it until there's proof that it works and until we know the fans really enjoy it. Let's just hope to God it isn't some kind of competitive multiplayer. So what do you guys think of Bethesda Game Studios perhaps developing multiplayer modes in the future for their games? Make sure you let me know in the comment section below. But that's enough from me. Thank you all very much for watching today's video. I will see you all next time. Take care. Do subscribe if you're new here. Farewell.